Hello, hello, hello. I don't know if you can hear me. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope so. It looks as if you can. Everything seems to be set up right here. The microphone seems to be working, so I think we're okay. If you want to tell me in the comments if you hear me, just to make sure that the volume is right. Good evening, Galo. Good evening, Jime. Okay, good. Here we are. So my camera is not very good, but the image is quite small, so I imagine uh, resolution is not going to be a problem. Anyway, you need to see the text and you need to hear me. There's not a lot to see, just my face. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for joining. We have a few people. Uh, Hopefully, more will come later. And if not, well, it's just going to be a tight group. Um, this is how I'm planning to work on the Bilbo Baggins Reading Club. This is how I expect it to work, but we'll probably end up finding a good dynamic together. Um, the idea is to read the text, right, and to analyze different aspects of the Lord of the Rings as we move forward, going over the text. So I invite you to read with me. If you have the text, like I'm going to be showing in the screen and following what I'm reading in the screen. If you want, you can follow on a separate text on the actual book, because it's great to read on an actual book, right? I have my Lord of the Rings here because I love the smell of a page. But I'm going to be reading from the screen. Um, Feel free to comment. Actually, I want you to comment. I'm going to be reading the comments. I will be interacting with you. I'm going to be asking you for any ideas or interpretations or questions that you may have. I have some things planned that I want to say. But if there are other things that you come up with, the idea is to discover a little bit the text together, because we tend to assume things when we read. And especially with this work that is so old already and so famous, and we have movies. So sometimes we're a bit contaminated when we read it, right? So the idea is to do like trying to do a fresh reading, right? If you read it before, let's try to read it as if it were the first time, a little bit, right? And if you haven't read it before, well, it's a great opportunity to go over it. Yeah. We're not going to read the whole chapter one, A Long Expected Party, because I think it's a bit too long for that. So we're going to read as much as time allows. And in this first chapter, we're going to focus a lot on hobbits. Yeah, there's a prologue in the book. I don't know if you've heard it. That is concerning hobbits and talks a lot about hobbit society and all that. But we're not going to read that here. Feel free to read it yourselves. And if you have read it already, you can reference it here. Yes, we might reference some things from there, but the idea is to focus on the beginning of the book, chapter one, and see what we discover from. There are certain clues that we're going to find already here in chapter one. First, we're going to begin to get to know the hobbits, hobbit society. It's going to be very important in this book, right? What hobbits represent, and why hobbits are as important as they are in this book. So one of the things is who or what are hobbits. And then we're going to start seeing, not very much because it's not going to come up so much yet, but we're going to see a little bit already from almost the beginning, the effects of the ring, which is something that that is it's great for debate, because one of the things I love about Tolkien, we're going to see that later. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but is the way in which magical things work, right? And this and the powers of Sauron, the power of Gandalf. It's not as obvious sometimes, and it's not as magic is kind of a subtle thing, and no one that actually uses magic refers to what they do as magic, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. Yeah. But well, I don't want to keep you just talking, so we're going to start reading. And any comments, go ahead. I will be reading them and interacting with you. Yeah. So let's start, shall we? And see how this works. I hope it's fun. Let's have a look. So let's begin. Chapter 1 from The Lord of the Rings, Book 1, The Fellowship of the Ring. Yes. A long expected party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years, ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return. The riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough for fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90, he was much the same as at 50. At 99, they began to call him well preserved, but unchanged would have been near the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess, apparently, perpetual youth, as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth. It'll have to be paid for, they said. It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. Okay, just a brief pause after this first paragraph. One thing is that, yes, totally, trouble will come of it, right? This is a foreshadowing that the hobbits are making, right? It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it, absolutely. But when we see here Mr. Baggins, Bilbo's age, sometimes, when you look at the movie, in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Ian Holm is Bilbo Baggins, and he's middle aged, right? His hair is kind of whitish already. He's young for obviously 111 years old, but the words here, I'm not sure if that's the Bilbo that we get here, because the words that we have here, right, is that at, at 90 he was much the same as at 50. So we don't know how much he changed, but apparently not very much. At 99, they began to call him well preserved, but unchanged would have been near the mark. So at 99, right, he looked the same as at 90, and at 90 he was much the same as at 50. 50 is the age when, if you've seen or read The Hobbit, right, or if you know the story of The Hobbit, when Bilbo finds the ring, that is the almost the protagonist of this story. When Bilbo finds the ring, he's 50, right? So we have a person that is 99 years old, 50 years later, hasn't changed virtually anything. Yes. Probably looking even younger than Ian Holm does, Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Um, so that's the first time that we read something unusual here going on. If you know about the ring, you don't necessarily know, because the ring that you know about, if you read the Hobbit, just makes people invisible. We don't know that it does anything else. So here we have the first mystery, right? 99, well preserved but unchanged, would have been near the mark. So that's the first sign that we have of something unusual, right? Let's continue. But so far, trouble had not come, and Mr. Baggins was generous with his money. As Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Bagginses, and he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. Okay, one more thing about Bilbo in this paragraph, right? Very important about Bilbo, yes? And is that he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits of poor and unimportant families. In earlier drafts, I think it said in The Return of the Shadow, or in one of the books that compile the history of the writing of the Lord of the Rings, um, I think they actually say that he had lots of friends amongst the poorer or more unimportant families. Bilbo is landed gentry, right? We're going to keep reading that now, but we're going to see that Bilbo owns land, right? And not everyone in Hobbit society owns land. We don't have an absolutely clear picture of Hobbit society, right? What exactly what's their form of government is not absolutely clear. They have a mayor. Uh, we don't know if if it's an elected official. There are important families that are landowners. It's an agrarian society, so I imagine some people own the land and some people don't. We're going to see very soon that there are hobbits that don't own land and that are working class hobbits. And Bilbo isn't a working class hobbit. Bilbo is an aristocrat, not just because he came back with treasure, but because he lives in a very big, it's a hobbit hole, but it's a very big one, right? It's maybe near, I don't know if a mansion, not as much as a mansion, but it's like a very big important hobbit hole. Yes. So Bag End is an important place, and it's the place of a rich, relatively wealthy, at least hobbit, that is Mr. Baggins. Yeah. We'll see more of that later. The eldest of these, the cousins that we mentioned before, the eldest of these and Bilbo's favorite was young Frodo Baggins. When Bilbo was 99, he adopted Frodo as his heir and brought him to live at Bag End. And the hopes of the Sackville Bagginses were finally dashed. Yeah, the Sackville Bagginses are like second cousins, I think. Um, and it's interesting that they keep that they're the union of two families, right? The Sackvilles and the Bagginses, and they keep the two surnames. You know, it's like people here, if all of you, I think, are joining from Argentina, people in Argentina that are from the I don't know, posh parts of the city, or that come from very old important families, and they keep both surnames, right, to show that. Well, that's a little bit what the Sackville Baggisons seem to be doing here. I We're going to see a bit later about the Sackville Bagginses how this double surname of the Sackville Bagginses actually is very related to their personality and the way in which they behave, which is also unusual for Hobbit society. You're not going to find, I think we're not going to find any mention of other Hobbits that go by their two surnames, right? That's just the Sackville Bagginses that are very dignified, and they want to probably show their dignity and their important families they come from. The Bagginses are indeed an important family, and apparently the Sackvilles as well. Yeah. Bilbo and Frodo happen to have the same birthday, September 22nd. You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad, said Bilbo one day. And then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together. At that time, Frodo was still in his tweens, as the hobbits called the responsible. Oh, sorry, I moved that, but let me go back very quickly. We were here, right? The tweens, here, right? As the hobbits call the responsible 20s between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed. Each year, the Bagginses had given very lively combined birthday parties at Bag End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned for that autumn. Bilbo was going to be 111, 111, a rather curious number and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old Took himself had only reached 130. And Frodo was going to be 33, an important number, the date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and Bywater, and rumor of the coming event traveled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscences in welcome demand. Now, this is the part where we're going to have a good view of hobbits. Yes, we're going to have a conversation now with the gaffer, Sam Ganji's uncle. And I want you to tell me first, if you can, right? If any of you wants to, otherwise I'll just keep going. But if any of you wants to share, uh, if you've read it before, right? I don't know if you read it in Spanish or in English, but did you notice anything peculiar about the way the gaffer speaks, or about this more working class hobbit speak? Sam Gamgee, the way he speaks, do you notice that he speaks different from the others? Have you, if you've read it, do you notice differences? I don't know if you want to comment or if you're shy. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. Okay, well, there is a difference. Yeah, I'll just keep talking, and you can join in with your comments if you want. There is a total difference in the way hobbits speak. We're going to find that If you've seen the movie, in the movie it's the same. Maybe you haven't paid attention, but in the movie they have different accents. Actually, well, Pippin has an Irish accent, I think, right? Uh, or maybe Western English accent. That we're gonna have here a good example of working class hobbits. So you're gonna see that they're very different from Frodo and Bilbo, who's a very well educated man. Yeah. But let's read that. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he had tended the garden at Bag End for 40 years and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself in number 3 Backshot Row, just below Bag End. A very nice, well spoken, gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo, as I've always said, the gaffer declared, with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hamfast and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables. In the matter of roots, especially potatoes, the gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself. Here we see an example of what they said before about Bilbo's relationship with working class hobbits, right? Calling him Master Hamfast as a sign of respect. Normally, this master with a capital M, right? If for somebody that has a higher station, that has a higher social standing, right? Um, Sam calls Frodo Master Frodo, right? And they call him Master Bilbo. So this calling him Master Hamfast is a sign of respect, yes, that probably other people would not have with the gardener. Um, Okay. But what about this Frodo that lives with him? Asked old Noakes of Bywater. Baggins is his name, but he's more than half a Brandybuck, they say. It beats me why any Baggins of Hobbiton show got looking for a wife away there in Buckland where folks are so queer. And no wonder they're queer, put in Daddy Twofoot, the gaffer's next door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River and right again the old forest, there's dark bad place if half the tales be true. Okay. I love two things here, two language things, typical of a nerd like me that I love. But first, this right again, the old forest. Again is like an old version of an old form of against, like next to, right? Right next to the old forest, again, the old forest. And then it says, if trails be true, right? The be here, right? If you know that today in modern English or in proper English, we would say if half the trails are true, right? But this is a subjunctive. This is a kind of an old thing, and they're using a subjunctive here because it's used in cases, you will see every time that it appears, it's used in cases when they're talking about legends, tales. It's like they say, if half the tales be true as they say, right? So he's not, it's not a statement made by Daddy Twofoot, right? He's just saying that people say that. So the uses of a subjunctive, and this is very regional, very dialectical, and kind of old, right? So here they're showing in the way they speak that these are not so educated, at least not in the formal English, and they have a more oral, folksy, regional, dialectal um, English. Yeah. Um, okay. So, where are we? Right. And another thing, the word queer, right? We have the word queer here. Yeah. Uh, that maybe some people today know the modern word queer. Queer means just means strange, unusual. That's all, right? That's the original meaning of the word. And it's a very common, Tolkien likes this word a lot. He uses it a lot. Okay. And no wonder they're queer. They live next to the wrong forest. That's a dark place, if half the tales be true. You're right, Dad, said the gaffer. Not that the Brandybucks of Buckland live in the old forest, but they are a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river, and that isn't natural. Small wonder the trouble came of it, I say. But be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet. Very much like Mr. Bilbo, and in more than looks. After all, his father was a Baggins. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins, as was never much to tell of him, till he was drowned. Drowned also, right? Drowned with a D, right? Very dialectical. Drowned, said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before, of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history, and they were ready to hear it again. Family history, it sounds to me like it's more like gossip. Like this is a euphemism for gossip, right? They just love gossip, and we're going to see that hobbits are quite gossipy. Um, well, so they say, said the gaffer. You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Primula Brandybuck. She was our Mr. Bilbo's first cousin on the mother's side, her mother being the youngest of the old Duke's daughters. And Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So Mr. Frodo is his first and second cousin, once removed either way, as the saying is, if you follow me. If you follow me, it's the same thing that Sam says all the time. If you take my meaning, I think Sam says, but it sounds very similar. And Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, old Master Gorbadoc, as he often did after his marriage. Him being partial to his victuals, and old Gorbadoc keeping a mighty general stables. And he went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned, and poor Mr. Frodo only a child and all. I've heard they went on the water after dinner in the moonlight, said old Noakes, and it was Drogo's weight that sunk the boat. And I heard she pushed him in and he pulled her in after him, said Sandyman, the Hobbiton miller. You shouldn't listen to all you hear, Sandyman, said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller. There isn't no call to go talking of pushing and pulling. Boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this Mr. Frodo left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among those queer Bucklanders, being brought up anyhow in Brandy Hall, a regular warren by all accounts. Old Master Gorbadoc never had fewer than a couple of hundred relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed than when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. Okay, we're going to see very commonly here this point of the decent people, right? Decent people are people that don't do queer things. They don't go on adventures. They don't do anything unusual, right? They're predictable. They're kind of boring. That's the decency of hobbits, right? However, they apparently love stories of hobbits who aren't decent. They love maybe talking behind their back, right, about hobbits that are not so decent. Yeah. Um, let's keep going. But I reckon it was a nasty knock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were going to get Bag End that time when he went off and was thought to be dead. And then he comes back and orders them off, and he goes on living and living and never looking a day older, bless him. And suddenly he produces an heir and has all the papers made out proper. The Sackville Bagginses won't ever see the inside of Bag End now, or it is to be hoped not. There's a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell, said a stranger, a visitor on business from Mickle Delving in the West Farthing. All the top of your hill is full of tunnels packed with chests of gold and silver and jewels, by what I've heard. Okay, I love the spelling of with the double O. That's another thing that Tolkien is going to do several times, right? Spelling in the way that the character speaks, right? This is not because in a proper British, right? Jew, right? This would be jewels, and it might even sound like two syllables, jewels, right? And or jewels, and this is jewels. It's just a long oo, right? It's just the way they're talking. Again, they're showing you how I don't know if the word provincial is not the word, but they're really not learned. They probably can't read or write. Actually, we're going to see that it's very likely that these are people that can't read or write. Yeah. Uh, so then you've heard more than I can speak to, answered the gaffer. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Bilbo is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it. But I know of no tunnel making. I saw Mr. Bilbo when he came back, a matter of 60 years ago, when I was a lad. I've not long come prentice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at Bag End, helping him to keep folks from trampling and trappesing. Trappesing is like walking all over that, right? All over the garden while he was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a pony and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he had picked up in foreign parts, where there be mountains of gold, they say. Again, you see, there be mountains of gold. Subjunctive, they say. He's not saying it, it's just people say it, right? But there wasn't enough to fill tunnels. But my lad Sam will know more about that. He's in and out of Bag End. Crazy about stories of the old days, he is, and he listens to all Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learned him his letters, meaning no harm, mark you, and I hope no harm will come of it. Okay, this is a phrase that shows us that at least the gaffer is clearly um, uneducated, and Sam isn't, because Bilbo taught him, right? Taught him his letters, learned him his letters, taught him to read and write. But most hobbits, at least we can see that working class hobbits don't. Here we have a miller, we have a gardener. There are probably people that work. There are farmers that farm, that work the farms and don't own them. Maybe that work the land and don't necessarily own the land, right? So we have this group of working class hobbits that speak in this way, that don't know how to read or write, right? We we we, we tend to have a view, I think, or there is a common view of hobbits that is kind of idealized, and we'll see in other points also that hobbits are not. Hobbit isn't such an idyllic society. I mean, it is certainly people, they are well good natured, and they're not violent people, they're peaceful, um but it is a class society. I mean, it's not an egalitarian society. It's not a paradise for everyone. Clearly some people have to work hard in this world, right? So we're going to see mostly, except for this parts here in the beginning and some aspects, and for the character of Sam that is going to go with us all along and give us this other view, we're going to be following this book through the eyes of the landed gentry of the Shire, right? We're going to see a Baggins, right? Who is the owner of Bag End and owns, at least those lands. Maybe he doesn't own farms and all that, but he owns those lands. And then we have a Took and a Brandybuck that we're going to see later who they are, right? But we're going to have Mary Brandybuck and Pippin Took, who are the heirs, the descendants of the two most powerful families in the Shire, right? They say, I read somewhere, that hobbits don't have nobility, and it's true, they don't, but kinda, right? It's not a noble, but it's almost like a feudal lord, like a lord of the manor, right? And Buckland is almost like a feud of the Brandybuck family, right? So Hobbit society is not so perfect. I mean, it's probably better than some other places, some other places that we're gonna see in this story, but it's not such a cool place as we sometimes think. At least not for probably the gaffer that is working under the sun, or for some of the people that we're meeting here in this inn. Yeah. Um, let's keep going. Elves and dragons, I says to him. Cabbages and potatoes are better for me and you. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble too big for you, I says to him. And I might say to others, he added with a look at the stranger and the miller. Don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, right? They are better. They're richer. They have lands. They're landed aristocracy, not working class, right? Again, but the gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of the younger generation of hobbits. But he has likely enough been adding to what he brought at first, argued the miller, voicing common opinion. See how they're gossipy? He's often away from home. And look at the outlandish folk that visit him. Dwarves coming in at night, and that old wandering conjurer Gandalf and all. You can say what you like, Gaffer, but Bagant's a queer place, and its folk are queerer. And you can say what you like about what you know no more than you do of boating, Mr. Sandyman, retorted the Gaffer, disliking the miller even more than usual. If that's being queer, then we could do with a bit more queerness in these parts. There is some not far away that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole with golden walls. But they do things proper at Bag End. Our Sam says that everyone's going to be invited to the party and there's going to be presents. Mark you, presents for all this very month, as is. Okay. Um, this first section kind of sets the story for something mysterious. That, let's say, there are a couple of ominous things, right? But we still don't have a lot of clues of anything dark happening. It's actually all celebration. We're gonna have a couple more clues a little later, yeah, when Gandalf shows up, and Gandalf is gonna say a couple of ominous things, yeah. Um, That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask. A day or two later, a rumor, probably started by a knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that there were going to be fireworks. Fireworks! What is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for nigh on a century, not indeed since the old Took died. Days passed and the day drew nearer. An odd looking wagon laden with odd looking packages rolled into Hobbiton one evening and toiled up the hill to Bag End. The startled hobbits peered out of lamplit doors to gape at it. It was driven by outlandish folk, singing strange songs, dwarves with long beards and deep hoods. A few of them remained at Bag End. At the end of the second week in September, a cart came in through Bywater from the direction of Brandywine Bridge in broad daylight. An old man was driving it all alone. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf. He had long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Small hobbit children ran after the cart all through Hobbiton and right up the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks, as they rightly guessed. At Bilbo's front door, the old man began to unload. There were great bundles of fireworks of all sorts and shapes, each labeled with a large red G and the elf rune, the one that we have here. Okay, I think Ian McKellen is a great Gandalf, right? By the way, and I think it works well in the film that Gandalf is actually all in gray with a gray hat and it's kind of a broad brim, but probably it's more of a pointy hat with a not a very wide brim because his eyebrows they say that they stick out of the brim, so it can't be such a wide brim or his eyebrows would have to be really really massive and bushy, right? And I don't think he's an alien or Wolverine. It's just probably like more similar to the Merlin hat, you know what I'm talking about. So blue cone, right? And then a silver scarf. So he's a bit more colorful. He's got also gray, but he's not such a vagabond, apparently, right? At least he likes wearing bright colors here. That was Gandalf's mark, of course. And the old man was Gandalf the Wizard, whose fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fires, smokes, and lights. Yes? Interesting reference, right? Fire, smokes, and lights. We don't know this yet, right? But Gandalf is going to have continuously an association with fires. I don't know if smokes, right? Precisely, but with fire and light, definitely. And a lot of Gandalf's power is always going to come in the form of fire and light. Yes. We're going we well, if you haven't read it and you don't know this, you will know when we get there. But there is a perfectly good reason for this, and you will see that it's a constant in Gandalf. Yeah, the association with light and with fire, especially. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous, but the Shire folk never knew nothing about it. To them, he was just one of the attractions at the party. Hence the excitement of the Hobbit children. G for grand, they shouted, and the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobbiton occasionally and never stopped long. But neither they nor any but the oldest of their elders had seen one of his firework displays. They now belonged to a legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarfs, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single squib or a cracker was forthcoming, to the disappointment of the onlookers. Run away now, said Gandalf. You will get plenty when the time comes. Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbit stared at the door in vain for a while, and then made off, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Bag End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room, looking out west onto the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden, snapdragons and sunflowers and nasturtiums trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows. These are all different flowers. Yeah, nasturtiums, I had to look it up. It's kind of a magnolia, I think, something like that. Um, how bright your garden looks, said Gandalf. Yes, said Bilbo. I am very fond indeed of it and of all the dear old Shire. But I think I need a holiday. You mean to go on with your plan then? I do. I made up my mind months ago and I haven't changed it. Very well. It is no good saying any more. Stick to your plan. your whole plan, mind, and I hope it will turn out for the best for you and for all of us. I hope so. Anyway, I mean to enjoy myself on Thursday and have my little joke. Who will laugh, I wonder, said Gandalf, shaking his head. We shall see, said Bilbo. Okay, do you notice in anything foreshadowing, anything here that shows us, right, that something that Gandalf suspects something, not that something is going on, but that Gandalf thinks something is going on. That Gandalf is making a warning here. Yeah, subtly. He's not saying, "Hey, I warn you. This is what you should do." Right? Um, but I don't know if you noticed that Gandalf is saying your whole plan, mind. Yeah. Uh, Hello there, Druida Cibernetico, and hello, Jimena, that joined there. And I hadn't seen that before. Minimal Media, that you commented, Master Frodo. Yes, totally right. As we will going to see a lot of use, and we're going to see another use of Master actually very quickly. Very soon in this first session, we're going to see a different use of Master. Every time the word Master appears, it's one of two or three reasons when somebody calls somebody master, and it's not always a sign of respect, and that's something that we're going to see in other moments, that when the hobbits are treated as masters, not in precisely a very respectful manner. um okay. So yeah, your whole plan, mind, and I hope it will turn out for the best for you and for all of us. Yes. What does he mean? Right. So far in the story, we know that he's planning a party, right? So first, what is the whole plan? That's what we're going to find out. And also, I hope it will turn out for the best for you and for all of us, right? I don't think he's just talking about what they will do after Bilbo has gone or what they will do at the party. He's not talking about that. He's talking about something else, right? Um, what? We'll see that soon. Okay. Um, let's go until we finish, until the party. Yeah, that's what we're going to cover here. The next day, more carts roll up the hill, and still more carts. There might have been some grumbling about dealing locally, but that very week, orders began to pour out of Bag End for every kind of provision, commodity, or luxury that could be obtained in Hobbiton, or by water, or anywhere in the neighborhood. People became enthusiastic, and they began to tick off the days on the calendar, and they watched eagerly for the postman, hoping for invitations. Before long, the invitations began pouring out, and the Hobbiton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary assistant postmen were called for. I love that the Bywater post office was snowed under in letters, obviously. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations of, "Thank you, I shall certainly come." A notice appeared on the gate at Bag End: no admittance except on party business. Even those who had or pretended to have party business were seldom allowed inside. Bilbo was busy, writing invitations, taking off answers, packing up presents, and making some private preparations of his own. From the time of Gandalf's arrival, he remained hidden from view. One morning, the hobbits woke to find a large field south of Bilbo's front door covered with ropes and poles for tents and pavilions. A special entrance was cut into the bank leading to the road, and white steps and a large white gate were built there. The three hobbit families of Bagshot Row, adjoining the field, were intensely interested and generally envied. Old Gaffer Gamgee stopped even pretending to work in his garden, right? So even the old gardener stops working this moment. Nobody, it's like, like when you have a long weekend or you have a holiday coming and there's a big event coming up, and then like nobody does anything because, it's almost the holiday already. I think it's something like that. The tents began to go up. There was a specially large pavilion, so big that the tree that grew in the field was right inside it and stood proudly near one end, at the head of the chief table. Lanterns were hung on all its branches. More promising still to the hobbit's mind, an enormous open-air kitchen was erected in the north corner of the field. A draught of cooks from every inn and eating house for miles around arrived to supplement the dwarves and other odd folk that were quartered at Bag End. Excitement rose to its height. Yes, slowly also Tolkien, the narrator, is building up excitement. Yes, not just the hobbits get excited. We begin to anticipate in this text the party that's coming right after so much that they're telling us about it. Then the weather clouded over. That was on Wednesday, the eve of the party. Anxiety was intense. Then Thursday, September the 22nd, actually dawned. The sun got up, the clouds vanished, flags were unfurled, and the fun began. Bilbo called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments rolled into one. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by accident, but as they turned up all the same, that did not matter. Many people from other parts of the Shire were also asked, and there were even a few from outside the borders. Bilbo met the guests and additions at the new White Gate in person. He gave away presents to all and sundry. The latter were those who went out again by a back, went again by a back way and came in again by the gate. Right, they went back way and came in again at the way. Very clever hobbits. Hobbits give presents to other people on their own birthdays, not very expensive ones as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion. But it was not a bad system. Actually, in Hobbiton and Bywater, every day in the years was somebody's birthday, so that every hobbit in those parts had a fair chance of at least one present at least once a week. But they never got tired of them. Okay, another thing about hobbits, they're kind of materialistic, right? It's in an innocent way, but they love presents, they love objects, they love things, and they don't have much use for them. It says in another place that they love giving gifts in the, I think in the prologue, in the introduction, right? It says that they love giving gifts, things that they call mathoms, that are things that basically nobody knows what's the use of that anymore. Nobody would use anymore. For example, a sword or a shield, right? Hobbits are peaceful, they don't fight. So a sword is a mathom. They love giving this kind of presents, right? That are completely useless, but they love them anyway. So they love having stuff. I think some of them might be hoarders, you know. Maybe there are a couple that hoard way too many mathoms in their house. So I think that might happen with hobbits. Okay, on this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The Hobbit children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys the like of which they had never seen before, all beautiful and some obviously magical. Many of them had indeed been ordered a year before and had come all the way from the mountain and from Dale, and were of real dwarf make. Okay, Mountain and Dale. If you don't haven't read The Hobbit, go read The Hobbit. Right. These are the Mountain and Dale are the, the destination, let's say, of Bilbo's famous trip to find the dwarven treasure in the Lonely Mountain. Yeah. Um, Whenever a guest had been welcomed and was finally inside the gate, there were song, dances, music, games, and of course, food and drink. There were three official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner, or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times, there were merely lots of people eating and drinking continuously from 11 until 6:30, and when the fireworks started. The fireworks were by Gandalf. They were not only brought by him, but designed and made by him, and the special effects, set pieces, and flights of rockets were let off by him. But there was also a generous distribution of squibs, crackers, bacca wrappers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. There is no scene of Merry and Pippin burning a dragon, a huge dragon firework or anything like that, right? That doesn't happen. Merry and Pippin are a lot younger here. If Bilbo is 33, they're definitely in their tweens, but they're much younger. Yeah, same as Sam, who we are not going to see at the party. It said that everybody was invited, but we're gonna see. We're not gonna read about Sam at the party. There's no mention of Sam at the party. Actually, there's only a couple of mentions of Sam as the gaffer's son for the moment, right? There were rockets like a flight of scintillating birds singing with sweet voices. There were green trees with trunks of dark smoke. Their leaves opened like a whole spring unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with a sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces. There were fountains of butterflies that flew glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles, or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. There was a red thunderstorm and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprung suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army and came down again into the water with a hiss like 100 hot snakes. And there was also a last surprise. Here's the dragon, but it's a different context. In honor of Bilbo, and it startled the hobbits exceedingly, as Gandalf intended. The light went out, a great smoke went up. It shaped itself like a mountain seen in the distance and began to glow at the summit. It spouted green and scarlet flames. Out flew a red golden dragon, not life size, but terribly life-like. Fire came from his jaws, his eyes glared down, there was a roar, and he whizzed 3 times over the heads of the crowd. They all ducked, and many fell flat on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion. That is the sign for supper, said Bilbo. Okay, before we keep going with the supper, I love the description of all the different fireworks, right, that we have here. We have the dragon, it's not Merry and Pippin, that are um, lighting that dragon. It's Gandalf, yeah, himself. He's in charge of the fireworks. But I love the descriptions, right? Um, there was also, and there was, and there was, and there was, right? A forest of silver spears that sprung suddenly into the air with a yell like an embattled army. I wonder how. We're talking about Gandalf here, right? So I wonder how accurate these descriptions are, how poetic they are, or how accurate, let's say, how close to the images we're talking about here were Gandalf's fireworks, right? Um, Eagles, sailing ships, the dragon. It says the dragon was very lifelike, right? So apparently, these descriptions are quite impressive. Um, okay, so that is the signal for supper, said Bilbo. The pain and alarm vanished at once, and the prostrate hobbits leaped to their feet. There was a splendid supper for everyone, that is, except those invited to the special family dinner party. Yeah, and we're gonna have more news of this, the family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits one gross, though the word was not considered proper to use of people. And the guests were selected from all the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few special and related friends, such as Gandalf. Many young hobbits were included and present by parental permission, for hobbits were easygoing with their children in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of getting them a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of provender. There were many Bagginses and Boffins, and also Tooks and Brandybucks. There were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins's grandmother, and various Chubbs, connections of his Took grandfather, and a selection of Burrowses, Bolgers, Bracegirdles, Brockhouses, Good Bodies, Hornblowers, and Proudfoots. Some of these were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some had hardly ever been in Hobbiton before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire. The Sackville Bagginses were not forgotten. Otho and his wife Lobelia were present. They disliked Bilbo and detested Frodo, but so magnificent was the invitation card, written in gold ink, that they had felt it was impossible to refuse. Besides, their cousin Bilbo had been specializing in food for many years, and his table had a high reputation. Right? Again, the dignity of the Sackville Bagginses, right? They detest Frodo, but they can't resist the temptation of a beautiful gold invitation. Yeah. Um, all the 144 guests expected a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after dinner speech of their host, an inevitable item, and that's the key part of our reading today. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes, after a glass or two, would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast, in fact, an engrossing entertainment, rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the district in the ensuing weeks. But as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most of the stores, cellars, and warehouses for a mile around, that did not matter. Okay, now comes the speech. But before we get into the speech, that is the last part we're going to read today, and it's a pretty interesting part. I'm going to the bathroom very quickly, and I'll be right back. In the meantime, I remind you that I couldn't add the button to the banner, but I remind you that you can go to cafecito.app/Leonarte and buy me a mug of ale, as it says there, yeah, for my troubles and um, for my life, right? I don't know, to survive in this evil, dangerous, difficult world. Yeah. So I'll be back in 2 minutes, and we'll see this part that is about Bilbo's birthday speech. Yes, this famous speech, and what that means, and what I can understand about hobbits based on that speech. So I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, okay, okay. I'm back. Let's have a look at the last part that we're going to go there. I'll leave the banner there in case you want to buy me a mug of ale at Cafecito. Only 2,000 per cafecito. It's come on, it's a bargain. So um, each donation buys me an alfajor, maybe. No, alfajor Jorgito is 400 pesos each in my friendly Chinese supermarket. So that's an important one. Keep it in mind. Yeah, there's like 1,000 pesos, 1,500 pesos for an alfajor, but the best one in Argentina is just for 100 pesos. So if you spend more money, it's because you want to. Okay, but enough talking about Jorgito, the name of the alfajor, and let's keep going with this. Now we're gonna see the famous scene of the speech. Very well done in the movie, by the way. Very well preserved there. And we're gonna see something else about the way treat each other. First, Bilbo's gonna give his speech, and he's gonna get heckled. Yeah. Do you know what heckling is? Yeah, like in stand-up comedy when the comedian is talking or is doing his routine, and then people begin interrupting him or going boo or answering things to the comedian. That's called heckling, like bothering the person that's up on the stage, or they're gonna heckle Bilbo, right? But it's not mean. It's not mean spirited. Hobbits have this way of treating each other. They like teasing each other. They joke with each other. They even provoke each other a little bit, and it's all in good fun. They don't take themselves very seriously, apparently, and they don't take the others very seriously either. But nobody takes offense because they don't take themselves seriously, except, and this is where I was going before, for the Sackville Bagginses. The Sackville Bagginses take themselves very seriously, right? That's why they keep their two surnames, the Sackvilles and the Bagginses, right? They come from important families, so they take themselves seriously, and that's why they are kind of like pariahs in Hobbit society. Nobody seems to like them very much, and that's because hobbits make fun of one another and don't take themselves seriously enough to actually get offended. Right? The Sackville Bagginses get offended because they take themselves too seriously. They expect way too much dignity, um, and it's just not there. There's no dignity to be had, I guess. Right? In a way. Um, okay. So after the feast, more or less, came the speech. Most of the company were, however, now in a tolerant mood, at that delightful stage which they called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favorite drinks and nibbling at their favorite dainties, and their fears were forgotten. They were prepared to listen to anything and to cheer at every full stop. My dear people, began Bilbo, rising into his place. Here, 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 they shouted and kept on repeating it in chorus, seeming reluctant to follow their own advice, right? Bilbo left his place and went and stood on a chair under the illuminated tree. The light of the lanterns fell on his beaming face. The golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could see him standing, waving one hand in the air. The other was in his trouser pocket. My dear Bagginses and Boffins, he began again, and my dear Tooks and Brandybucks and Grubs and Chubbs and Burrowses and Hornblowers and Bulgars and Brace Girdles, Good Bodies, Broghouses and Proudfoots. Proud feet, shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, and well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table. Proudfoots, repeated Bilbo. Also, my good Sackville Bagginses, that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 111 today. Hooray, hooray, many happy returns, they shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bilbo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked, short and obvious. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves as much as I am. Deafening cheers, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes, and other musical instruments. There were, as has been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled. Most of them bore the mark Dale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed that they were marvelous crackers. They contained instruments, small but of perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner, some of the young Tooks and Brundigups, supposing Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary, now got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance tune. Master Everard Took and Miss Melilot Brandybuck got on a table and, with bells in their hands, began to dance the Springle Ring. A pretty dance, but rather vigorous. Yeah. So that's it. They're even interrupting Bilbo. Like that's enough. That you said all you have to do. Now the speech is over. Let's dance, right? But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud hoots. The noise subsided. I shall not keep you long, he cried. Cheers from all the assembly. Clearly, they don't want him to keep them long. I have called you all together for a purpose. Purpose with a capital P. Something in the way that he said this made an impression. That's why I suppose Tolkien put up capital P here to show that it's a purpose, right? Not a purpose. Like imagine the stress, especially on the first P. I have called you all together for a purpose, right? That strong opening P. That's why it's a capital. Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost silence, and 1 or 2 of the Tooks pricked up their ears. Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 11 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits. Tremendous outburst of approval. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment. By the way, it is supposed to be a compliment. Secondly, to celebrate my birthday. Cheers again. I should say our birthday, for it is, of course, also the birthday of my heir and nephew, Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today. Some perfunctory clapping by the elders, and some loud shouts of Frodo, Frodo, jolly old Frodo from the juniors. The Sackville Bagginses scowled and wondered what was meant by coming into his inheritance. I mean, they know what it means already. They're I don't know why they wonder. Together we score 144. Your numbers were chosen to fit this remarkable total. One gross, if I may use the expression. No cheers. This was ridiculous. Many of the guests, and especially the Sackville Bagginses, were insulted, feeling sure that they had been asked to fill up the required number like goods in a package. One gross indeed. Vulgar expression. I imagine it's the Sackville Bagginses saying this, right? That this is it's just them saying it. It totally sounds like them. It is also, if I may be allowed to refer to ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Esgaroth on the Long Lake. Though the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion, I was only 51 then, and birthdays did not seem so important. The banquet was very splendid, however, though I had a bad cold at the time, I remember, and I could only say, "Thank you very much." I now repeat it more correctly. "Thank you very much for coming to my little party." I love this part. Obstinate silence, right? It's like, man, you should have ended like a couple of minutes ago, right? This is way too much. They all feared that a song or some poetry was now imminent, and they were getting bored. Imagine. Why couldn't he stop talking and let them drink his health? But Bilbo did not sing or recite. He paused for a moment. Thirdly and finally, he said, "I wish to make an announcement." He spoke this last word so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could, right? You see again, right? Tolkien uses spelling, uses capitalization, uses different things to show you the intention sometimes of somebody speaking. "I regret to announce that, though, as I said, 11 years is far too short a time to spend among you, this is the end. I am going. I am leaving now. Goodbye." He stepped down and vanished. There was a blinding flash of light, and the guests all blinked. When they opened their eyes, Bilbo was nowhere to be seen. 144 flabbergasted hobbits sat back speechless. Old Odo Proudfoot removed his feet from the table and stamped. Then there was a dead silence until suddenly, after several deep breaths, every Baggins, Boffin, Took, Brandybuck, Chubb, Grubb, Burrows, Bolger, Bracegirdle, Brockhouse, Goodbody, Hornblower, and Proudfoot began to talk at once. Right? Okay, so this is when um, Bilbo disappears. Yes, there was he stepped down and vanished. There was a blinding flash of light. Yes, again we see light. That's Gandalf. Obviously, we know that later, right? But he's associated always with light and fire. This is like the magic he mostly does. There are other things actually. This is the most visible. These are the outer signs. His real power is different, and the reason why he's got a mission on Earth, on Middle Earth, Gandalf, right? And his power is another actually. But well, that hasn't come up yet, so we'll read that later. Yeah. It was generally agreed that the joke was in very bad taste, and more food and drink were needed to cure the guests of shock and annoyance. "He's mad, I always said so," was probably the most popular comment. Even the Tooks, with a few exceptions, thought Bilbo's behavior was absurd. For the moment, most of them took it for granted that his disappearance was nothing more than a ridiculous prank. But old Rory Brandybuck was not so sure. Neither age nor an enormous dinner had clouded his wits, and he said to his daughter-in-law Esmeralda, "There's something fishy in this, my dear. I believe that Matt Baggins is off again. Silly old fool. But why worry? He hasn't taken the victuals with him." He called loudly to Frodo to send wine round again. Okay, this old Rory Brandybuck is just here to give us this phrase to show that there are some people in the Shire that did know what was going on, or that are a little more shrewd, maybe that than most hobbits. Most hobbits don't appear to be so shrewd or so clever, right? But there are hobbits that have a keen mind. Frodo was the only one present who had said nothing. For some time, he had sat silent beside Bilbo's empty chair and ignored all remarks and questions. He had enjoyed the joke, of course, even though he had been in the know. He had difficulty in keeping from laughter at the indignant surprise of the guests, but at the same time, he felt deeply troubled. He realized suddenly that he loved the old hobbit dearly. Most of the guests went on eating and drinking and discussing Bilbo Baggins' oddities, past and present. But the Sackville Bagginses had already departed in wrath. Frodo did not want to have any more to do with the party. He gave orders for more wine to be served, then he got up and drained his own glass silently, to the health of Bilbo, and slipped out of the pavilion. Okay, now comes the part where we finally see the ring, right? We see what the ring does. Uh, it's a it's a bit of a long section that we have now, so we're gonna keep this one for the next meeting. Yes, um, we're gonna do this next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, today's Tuesday, right? So next Tuesday at 8, we'll keep doing, and we'll probably try to finish chapter 1 next Tuesday. Then when we're gonna read now Bilbo's departure, Bilbo's conversation with Gandalf, and we're going to see very clearly now, for the first time, we're going to understand very well what the ring does, what the ring does to Bilbo, what the ring did to Bilbo. And through that, we will understand better what the ring will do to Frodo and what the ring did to Gollum. Yeah. But we'll leave that. We'll leave the effects of the ring for next Tuesday. For today, I wanted to focus more on Hobbit society and on the first part that talks about hobbits. Yes, what we know about them, just to sum up, what we learn about hobbits in this part is that hobbits are that there is a working class, that it's less educated. We don't have a lot of this yet, although it is implied because we have it as Master Gorbadoc. We know that the Bagginses are landowners. Tolkien never actually tells us how Hobbit society is structured, right? He hints at it, but he doesn't tell us a lot about it. Like, we don't know exactly about their form of government, how it works. They don't seem to have a very centralized form of government, but they do have people with positions of authority, right? So there is a sort of aristocracy, and there is working class, or yeah, I would say working class hobbits. Um, and there are differences. There are social differences in this dinner that we saw here. Right, it's Bilbo's family that is invited. Um, so no, Sam is not there. The gaffer is not there. They're all family. If they're all family, they're probably all relatively well off, right? I don't know if they're all aristocratic, but apparently the working class hobbits that we saw at the inn are not the same ones that we have at this party, the Gross that formed the party. Yeah, um, and uh, and then we see that hobbits also are like to tease one another. They like to heckle one another. They don't take themselves seriously. They're good natured, apparently, right? They are good natured. And we're not gonna be reading the Lord of the Rings through a very absolute filter of class struggle, and because that's not the way the book is meant to be read. Let's say there isn't a lot of that. You can do, totally, you can, if you want to, a class analysis of the Lord of the Rings. There is actually a book. I don't remember the author, but there is a book that spins the Lord of the Rings around by giving you Sauron's um, view, kind of, right? And it treats Sauron as an industrialist and Mordor as a country that is at the brink of industrial revolution, and it's a prosperous country, and the orcs are not orcs. The orcs are people that are just called orcs by the fascist kind of, or racist elves and men of Gondor, right? So, and they do this reading that is interesting as a reading, but I don't think it holds very well, right? Because the way that this book is written, it is about good and evil. I mean, and I don't think the question is whether good and evil actually exist in the real world. I mean, they do and they don't, I guess. Um, but but Tolkien's book clearly shows them like that. The orcs are orcs. The orcs are not people that are treated unfairly or justly. They are corrupted beings by a dark power, right? They are, if you want to analyze it in this way, you can say that the orcs are the other, but they're not human, right? And the Lord of the Rings tries to avoid. I think Tolkien on purpose tried to avoid at least all any type of analogy in his book. Right? He always says that he detested analogy. So his book is not an analogy of anything. It's not an allegory. It's just a story they're telling you, right? Of course, you can make any interpretation you want, and we can make an interpretation we want, and they're valid, because I don't think a work of art is just the work of art. A work of art is the work, and is the interpretation of it. It's not just what the author meant; it's also what we read. So whatever you read in this book, it's fine. Yeah. But however, I don't think that it's interesting to see how Hobbit society works. It's interesting to see that they have social classes, because that has an impact in the story and in the characters of the story and in the way in which the characters of the story relate to one another. It's important to see that hobbits are good natured and that they don't take themselves too seriously, and all these things, and that they are good natured and they like to have fun. That's good because it's important for the story. Yeah. So we're not doing a class analysis of the Shire, but it's important to see a little bit how the Shire works, because a lot of that is important in the message of the story, right? Why is the Shire a place that is worth protecting so much? Why is the Shire a place that holds a certain type of power? There is a power in the Shire, Gandalf is going to say later. So, just to sum it up, for the moment, we'll stop here with this first part of the ring and this conversation on Hobbit society. We'll see how all that has an impact, and if you read it, you probably can begin to figure out, start thinking about interactions between Frodo and Sam, and especially between Sam and Pippin and Merry. Sam and Pippin, a lot of that, yes, and you'll see that Sam is not doesn't participate in the same jokes in the same way. It's not always on the same level. Sam responds to order. He calls them all master, and then you see that this is a class society, and that plays a big part in who the characters are. Yes, it will tell you why Frodo and Pippin and Merry, especially Pippin, why they are so sheltered. Yes, so today we finish here. It's getting late, and I think I've spoken for way too long. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And if everything goes well, I'll see you next week, where I'm going to finish chapter 1 of the Lord of the Rings. And feel free to participate. Send comments. You can leave comments later here in the video. The video will stay on the YouTube. And feel free to go if you want. And if you don't want, maybe as well, why not? Sometimes we do things we don't want to in life, right? So you can not want to and still go to cafecito.app/Leonarte. I couldn't tap the button, but you can go there and buy me a cafecito for my troubles and to deal with this very difficult life that we all have to deal with, in the tragedy that is our world. Like Macbeth said, life is but a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So with that beautiful phrase, kind of, I'll let you go. And I'll see you all hopefully next week.